Washington's mock game was extremely encouraging.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 to get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Lars, we just got back from Washington's mock game, and we got all kinds of takeaways. We're going to get at what we think Washington's strongest position group will be, some of the biggest questions that we have from today's game, and some of the biggest takeaways we have in total, where for me, we got a big one here, and I think you agree with me as well. This UW receiving core, the starting three, is very underrated.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's basically three guys who haven't had a chance to prove themselves. If you think about it, you're talking about Jeremiah Hunter, whose best season was with Jack Plummer, a Purdue transfer, who then bounced after one season at Cal to Louisville and basically had the same amount of success, but it wasn't that great. Will Rogers is above Jack Plummer, like significantly above. No, is he like a top five quarterback? No.
One thing we should say, just in that same vein, just to add to it, he showed today that he is far above that, and that I feel that there are some fans that have a low bar for what they see from Will. He's going to exceed all those bars. There's all those expectations.
And I would say it's fair to have a lower bar because he missed some time last season, and had it been at 21 Will Rogers or 22 Will Rogers, I think there'd be a lot more hype. But because he didn't play the whole game, then you go, new coach, new line, new basically everything. In even the receivers, he's got to break in because these guys weren't established last season. And that's the other side of it, is all of these guys have been in the room, or in Jeremiah's case, been in a room and been a guy. But now it's like, okay, and it's what Jeremiah told us this past week after practice, where it's like, yeah, I get to finally show what I'm capable of now because I have he didn't say this directly, to be clear, but he said, now I have the chance to kind of go out there and prove it in my last year, because I have a competent coach who's calling plays, because I have a competent quarterback. The question is, which we'll probably hit on way more in the second segment, is Rogers going to have enough time? Because in a mock game like this, in the first fall scrimmage, a week ago now, again, you can make the case where we have so many notes, and I'm sure we'll dive into it, where it was a scramble/sack. It was an incompletion/sack. And I know Jedd mentioned after one of the practices, I think actually after the first scrimmage, sometimes the guys that it's incomplete, they actually make a play on that in the game. And it's like, and so do the defensive ends, just absolutely spearing the quarterbacks. We can go both sides of this. And I think overall, I would be okay with where the offense is. Again, the quarterback and receiver play are fantastic. You're absolutely right. Without question, I don't know if it's the strongest unit to our third segment's point, but it's right up there. It's gonna be good as long as the offensive line gives it time.
So I certainly agree with you there. And one of the biggest things about it is Will Rogers, where Jeremiah, Denzel, Giles are all guys, as you said, which is a really great point. They just haven't had a chance to prove it, which is probably why this group isn't getting some of the love that it rightfully deserves. But I feel that there's another point we have to hit on there, just in terms of the offense, because I feel we saw more from the offense than we did from the defense, where it seemed very, very vanilla from the defense today, which is something I feel, over the last couple of years we usually said about the offense. But one thing that I really was just impressed by is somebody who has impressed us every single day, and that's Adam Mohammed, where one of my biggest takeaways from the game is just Adam Mohammed. We got a comment on one of our shows the other day that said, guys, don't forget about Cam Davis. We're not. Adam has not overtaken Cam Davis. These two things are very, very different. Cam is still above Adam. Cam is still going to be, in my opinion, a co-starter. He's not going to get the workload that Jonah is, but those two guys have they're going to get, let's call it 75% of the workload in the backfield. But I think the next 15% or maybe even 20 is going to be Adam Mohammed. He's going to play a big role on this team. And every single practice, just every single day, this coaching staff shows not only how much they like him, but he shows why they like him so much with explosive speed, power. He had a really nice stiff arm on somebody today, and his ability to just do everything, even as an 18-year-old true freshman. And he's only going to grow. And if we're looking at this, we're looking back on this show in 2026 and Adam Mohammed is one of the better running backs in the Big Ten, we're not going to be surprised.
No, I think the room is shaping up to be what it would have been like with last year with the 1-2 punch of Dylan Johnson and Cam Davis, and then with Tybo. And I say that as a purely on-field comparison because Tybo got some run over Richard Newton, like over some of the other veterans that were in the room. And I think to that point, Adam is going to be that third back off the bench. There's no question about it. I say there's no question because, again, we have seen Sam Adams in a decent run, but I still think in a game situation, now, again, I do think this is kind of where it gets a little intriguing because I don't disagree with anything you're saying about Adam Mohammed. I just think given how much we've seen from Sam, although we didn't see him at all, I don't think we saw him tonight.
We didn't see him at all tonight, no.
And so that, again, could be a precursor to, what the coaching staff maybe saw in the walkthrough or the practices leading up to it or whatever. So sure. I do want to acknowledge Sam Adams is still like very much existing, has been a contributor in this offense this fall. So as long as he's healthy, which is the caveat of his entire career, he will probably play some role as that fourth back, but no question, Adam, because he's been able to stay healthy, because of how he runs, and really he's shown kind of almost in that Jonah Coleman sense when he came in at Arizona, and the one thing Scotty Graham will always talk about is, hey, Jonah Coleman started the first game here as a true freshman and killed it, 98% on PFF. Yeah. I'm not saying Adam Mohammed's going to have a 98, and I'm not saying he's going to start, but he's going to have that type of lead-in season to our next season. We're talking about who are some of the big returning backs in the Big Ten. And one of the first 2 or 3 or 4 names is going to be Adam Mohammed.
Yeah. So I've got one last takeaway here on the defensive side, and I have to talk about this pass rush again. Because despite what everybody wants to think about the offensive line, and we're certainly going to get into some of those conversations. Also, shout out Jedd, for letting us go when getting everybody out of here when that happened tonight with that going on in the background. It's still pouring rain. There's lightning coming down. What a night. We're not going to, remind the everydayers what it's giving us flashbacks to. We don't need to go down that road from 2019. But I put something out on Twitter too. But with the pass rush, there are so many different times where when I watch it and you just see somebody coming unblocked, it's not because of the offensive line at a certain point. There's a certain point where this pass rush will get blitzing linebackers and blitzing members of the secondary that are disguised so well, and they're coached so well, and it's timed just so perfectly that it won't matter. It doesn't matter who's on the other side of the ball. They just find a way to get free rushers time and time and time again.
And I think it's also the multiplicity of how many different lines. Like we talk about the offensive line, to your point, some of those were one-on-one battles that the guy straight up just won on the defensive line. But part of it also is just there's so many different rotations you can throw out there along that defensive line and feel completely confident in. Not just, hey, you know what, let's see how these guys play together and we'll figure it out kind of like what they're doing with the offensive line. It's straight up dealer's choice. Who do you want? Sure. Deshaun Wayne, Jaden Wayne, or do you want Logan Tucker? Whoever Lynch, you want, Deshaun Lynch, whoever you want along that list, Zach Durfee, Voight Tanufi, Isaiah Ward. Again, we haven't seen a lot of Russell Davis, but there's still, and Jacob Lane is another guy who really, I know I mentioned it to you at practice this week, he's getting a lot of run with that kind of first and second team mix, which tells us he's going to be a contributor this fall. How much and what the snap count looks like, again, that'll always be subject to availability and how the season plays out. But I would be very surprised, barring health, if Jacob Lane doesn't play in every game this season.
Lars, we still have a bunch of questions, though, after Saturday's mock game, which we'll get to right after a message from our friends over at FanDuel, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube base plan, a TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/ FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. And there are so many great odds over there on FanDuel that you definitely need to go check out. One of them, I'm going to keep pushing it. I know, football is upon us, but I can't stop talking about Paul Skeens. I love watching that guy pitch so much. I think he's got NL Rookie of the Year basically locked up at this point. And I really think that he's going to make a strong push for Cy Young. And you need to go check out his odds over on FanDuel. Lars, before we get into the offensive line, I have one question that really popped up today that we haven't seen through any other live portions of practice, where, out on the side field at the last mock game, the Huskies had 3 fumbles today. I honestly don't remember one for the previous 2 weeks.
Yeah, I know. I think one of them was on special teams, to be clear. Gonna caveat that a little bit with Carson, and Carson Bruener was one. Actually, Carson forced 2, didn't he? Because he forced the one that was the last one. I don't remember off the top of my head who forced the middle one, but yeah, I think, which tells us again, Carson's gonna play up. That's not a surprise. I mean, I think again, the guys that he also did it with, it was Jason Robinson Jr. was the punt returner, right?
Yes,
or kick returner.
Oh, he's the kick returner.
So again, true. Yeah, Jason Robinson also had a pretty decent opening kickoff. Let's kind of give shout out is due there, and then also remind you why he's a freshman. And Carson's a hell of a linebacker, who's, by the way, been a special teams ace for the last 2 years. Ask Oregon how many. It was the Oregon game, right, when he popped somebody.
Michigan State.
Michigan. It was in on ESPN. It should have been Oregon. He had the Oregon energy though. But again, it's like Carson knows exactly more than anybody what he's doing on special teams. So I kind of give the leeway there on that one. But to your point, yeah, it was kind of not sloppy, but there were some mistakes, and also there was a couple of false starts. There was, I think, 1 or 2 illegal formations. Some penalties, a couple procedural, but nothing that to me was like, wow, this is a terribly coached team, or wow, these guys are like, we got a long way to go before we state. There's just some things to clean up, which I would still expect, especially for a group that is only playing together with each other for the second and a half week.
Something like that. Yeah. So I certainly agree with you there. It's still something that it felt uncharacteristic, which is why I wanted to bring it up, but it's still something you can't undermine, where it's, because there's one on the kickoff, there's one on the punt return from Jeremiah Hunter, and then the Decker DeGraaf one, which was a really great hit by Carson. So you have to give it up at a certain point, but it's still something that you certainly want to mention is more the point there. But we got to get into the offensive line here, where the biggest question is, will Landen Hatchett be able to start the season? Where it's something we discussed throughout the summer. And then we talked about it a couple weeks ago after Jedd told the media at Big Ten Media Days that Landen was going to be a starter for today's mock game. He wasn't. He was with the second team, and that's okay. He still played. I think he played his most snaps. He did. He played by far his most snaps, which is really good to see. You love to see that, but it wasn't with the first team. And I don't know if that was because we didn't really get a chance to talk to Jedd for as long as we might have wanted to after the game. Cause with the lightning, he had to make sure he went out to go to the photo day and everything. But I don't think we saw as much of Landen as we might have hoped that we would. But when he was in there, he looked solid. And that's something you wonder what it's going to look like on the first team, and if he's going to be with that first team on the 31st.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's per se a concern, because again, in the grand scheme of things, and much like the reaction I told you before we started recording when I was at the airport in Indy, it was one of the situations of the fact that Landen's already back with on-field drills at this going into fall camp was already like, okay, you know what? That's a win in my book. We're already on a good page there. And that's also why you bring in D'Angelo Titi-Leahy to, give Landen a chance, have a veteran there just in case. Now, again, the offensive line, how much of it is on the defense, how much of it is on the offense. To be fair, Will Rogers was 21 and 23. Damon was in the same ballpark. I think 12 or 14 is what I have. 12, 14, 14 and 17, somewhere in that ballpark. Not a ton of incompletions, but a lot of scrambles because the pocket was not there. And I think especially with Damon being with that unofficial second team line, I think to me, that's why we're not seeing Landen. And I think actually to your point, the fact that it's the most snaps, that's what's promising about it. I would rather have Landen get more snaps with the twos, and especially thinking long-term, knowing he's going to be Damon. Well, as long as Damon starts next year, he's going to be the starting center. So you're okay getting those reps. Now, again, we would both love to see Landen Hatchett. And I think I honestly think jury's still out on who right now entering the season would be better, Landen or D'Angelo, just because when you add in D'Angelo's veteran presence, Landen coming back from the injury, I think Landen will be a better long-term center and higher ups. He has higher upside than D'Angelo without question. But I think especially for this first month of September, this first 3 games, Landen will absolutely play, no doubt, with in coming in for D'Angelo in that regard. In the second half, as long as the game is in hand, especially against Weber State and Eastern Michigan. But I think it's more or less building him up to where I could easily see the coaches saying, well, hey, maybe we can kick D'Angelo over to right guard if we don't like how that's looking and put Landen in center when we know for a fact he's fully healthy. And that's why they're ramping him up. We saw a lot more of Durfee than we did of Landen because, again, Durfee was expected to come back sooner. Guard's been a full go because his injury was sooner. So I think it's just Jedd having a little bit of gamesmanship, but I don't think it's necessarily a true cause for concern because Landen at some point is going to be the team center.
I'm certainly with you there. Lars, what other questions do you have from this game?
I mean, the other thing that I have to kind of look at where, we saw, how do I put this? They didn't go deep a ton, so we didn't see the true cornerbacks being tested. Also, to be fair, Jedd Fisch was asked about Elijah Jackson's absence tonight. He said not too concerned about it. Thaddeus has also
he called it a rest day, yeah.
Right, and Thaddeus has been holding it down in that second spot as opposite Prysock for a while now, just in terms of constant reps with that unit. But I'm just curious, how is the depth going to look behind it? Because I have no question the starting safeties, especially when fully healthy with Cameron Broussard, Kamren Fabiculanan, Jordan Shaw, Patience Prysock, and Thaddeus Sixon, I'm okay with that. But the depth behind it, to me, especially going into the Big Ten, this is for me where I'm thinking, okay, how much are those younger guys? How much can Curly Reed catch up? How much can some of these other guys make headway? And if let's just say Elijah misses a couple of games in September, how does that look? Now, again, against lesser competition, not as bad, but if that lingers and that depth, like we saw in 22, gets tested in the secondary, all the pressure goes onto the D-line, which, again, we are both fans of, but I need to see a little more depth in the secondary, more so at corner than anything else. Because I think safety we're good at, just to be clear.
So I certainly hear your point, and I think that's why, we talked about Rashawn Clark, who was listed as safety, has gotten a lot of time at outside corner. It feels like that's kind of where that's coming from. And I mean, you talk about some of these younger guys that are in the room, whether it be Leroy Bryant, Caleb Presley, Curly Reed. I certainly have a lot of questions in terms of where they're at in their development, because we haven't necessarily seen as much of them as we have some of these top guys, as you said, Prysock, Jackson, and Dixon. But one thing that, you saying that just got me thinking about is the 2025 class, where that's why they went out and got a Ramon Adams, who looks like more of a long-term project, a Darian Clemens who can come in, play in the slot, that sort of thing, and a dude that looks ready to play on the outside immediately in Dylan Robinson. Where it's okay, yeah, if all 3 of these guys end up leaving, which does seem very likely, just depending on draft stock and things like that, where if all 3 of those guys end up going, you can figure it out with probably Leroy, who's looked really good when he has been out there in camp. And, Caleb Presley's come along. Rashawn Clark's been sidelined for a little while. So he looks impressive. I really like his technique so far early on. But I hear what you're saying, and that's one of the things I like about this defense and some of the guys that are in there short term, where I feel that some of these safeties can do a really good job of masking just, if that depth problem might pop up at some point. And on top of that, another thing that I feel that does a really good job of masking potential issues at the position is the scheme itself, where there's just, for anybody who's out there, they saw so many different things going on the back end where guys are starting in one position, not lining up there. It looks like they're going to be, doing one thing on a particular play, and they're blitzing. It's all over the place. It's the best way to describe it without getting too into the weeds of what's going on. But I think that that's also something that I'm considering when I think about the cornerback depth, is this scheme can do a really, really good job of developing players that you might not necessarily expect to do a certain thing and make them into a very serviceable player in a particular role.
Yeah, I agree. I just think when you looked at, but the other thing with that is also the defense does multiple things, but it also does kind of require the cornerbacks to win one-on-one outside. And that's where I'm a little bit like, let's say Thaddeus has to miss a couple of games, or heaven forbid you're down both Thad and Elijah. Like that,
Sure.
That to me, that's like that. And again, I'm not rooting for injuries, but I'm just saying, given that we didn't see Elijah, we haven't seen a ton of him lately. That's where most of this is coming from. Where, again, do I like the upside of Leroy Bryant a couple years from now? Absolutely. Curly Reed, same thing. All these guys are great long-term projects that will probably play more so next year and be significant contributors. But it's just like, especially in the Big Ten, like that's to me where it's like in the Pac-12, maybe you can get away with it. In the Big Ten, I just have a little more questions about how much you can get away with getting exposed with depth, especially on defense.
Sure. I certainly see where you're going there. Lars, now let's get into what we think UW's strongest position group will be in 2024. Right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, little disclosure here for the everydayers. We have not shared our answer for this segment with one another just yet, where we've had this discussion before. We've predicted what we think of this before, but now we've seen everything that we're going to before August 31st, even on the media side. We're not going to see this team again until August 31st. What do you think Washington's strongest position group will be?
For me, there's two categories. Oh, shoot. Now the more I think about it, there's 4 really good categories, 5 really good categories. Are we excluding quarterbacks in this situation? Because to me, I think okay. So I still think the quarterbacks will be fine. I'm going to go with the defensive line because I think there's so much potential. And I think that's where I know everything starts. You could say the safeties, and I'm sure there's a lot of arguments that could be made. But for me, the amount of bodies and the different looks that front is going to be able to throw, I think will create opportunities on the back end. And it helps having a great linebacking core. So there's no slight there. But I just think for me, this defense, the tone's going to be set up front and everything is going to fall in tow.
I hear you. I'm going with the answer that I gave to our Locked On Huskies insiders the other day, because we got a great question from Insider Joe. And, anybody who's interested, should go check out the link in the description below, and they can get access to our Q&A where we did a whole 35-minute breakdown on what we think the roster is going to look like with position groups and everything else along those lines. But I've got to go with the safeties. And one of the reasons I say that is because of what I just said in the last segment, where, I feel that they can mask a lot. When you think about, Cam Fab, I think about Cameron Broussard, Justin Harrington, McKellisteen, Peyton Waters, who we saw a lot of tonight. And the more that I watch all these guys, the more I just think that they're going to do a lot. Like, we saw a lot of Justin Harrington lining up across from Carson Bruener at inside linebacker tonight. We saw 3 safeties on the field. We saw times where, there's 1 safety on the field and 3 linebackers. We've seen so many different combinations of just personnel packages, really. We've seen so many different personnel packages. And then within that, just the guys that they're using at the different spots. And it feels like no matter what they're doing, this coaching staff is really leaning heavily on utilizing the safeties in the room. And one of the reasons that they're doing that is because this is a really talented group.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the safeties a couple of times in the show. It's like, it's not for the lack of them. I'm not concerned about the safeties. We're concerned about the quarterbacks. But and that's the thing is, I think the D-line, the front, and the safeties are going to play off of each other, which basically is everything you're saying, because one's going to feed off of the other. And that's no side to the linebackers, because I think the linebackers and safeties, it's kind of like you have a front 4/5 and a back 6/7, depending on
how the play.
However, exactly. And I think that's the thing is you have so many capable bodies. But again, that's why you go out and get Cameron Broussard and Justin Harrington, not just Justin Harrington to play in the nickel, because we saw some Dyson McCutcheon out there. We obviously have seen Jordan Shaw dominate in nickel, so there's no doubt about that. but there's just so much flexibility those guys have shown, or even Elijah Jackson, not tonight, but in previous practices at safety, so they've been going with that kind of look no matter whoever they have back there, but there wasn't as much, I think, as you would expect in a game because of the lack of depth / guys that were not available. But with all that said, I think Cameron Broussard is going to surprise so many people this year. I mean, again, not us, but everybody else outside of the state of Washington, and really probably
and anybody who doesn't watch the Big Sky.
Yeah, exactly. Because, in the same light, that's the reason why I wanted the defensive line, because Sebastian Valdez, my word, like he is going to eat, no pun intended. That's not a comment about him as a person. That is just the perfect segue to say, whatever you think he does off the field to consume things, he consumes quarterbacks and opposing offensive linemen the exact same way. And also his own offensive linemen, because there were some crimes committed tonight by Sebastian Valdez.
If you had to pick a second group, who are you going with?
I'm going to say the wide receivers. And I know that'll leave you one or two positions to take on offense or stay on defense. But it's going back to that first point of what we said in the first segment. This trio, I know there's insurmountable expectations to live up to with Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk. I am not going to sit here and profess that this group will do those numbers. They won't. But my word, this scheme has the potential to create at least 2 1,000-yard receivers and a third who's going to get a lot of targets and some production. And I think even beyond that, when you think about Audric Harris, Rashid Williams getting back into the fold, Kevin Green Jr., who's been a consistent contributor in fall camp, Keith Reynolds has been a guy who, in that same kind of mold with Kevin Green, has been competing in that spot. But Kevin Cummings said 6 guys. So to me, can you name a position group? I mean, there's not a ton aside from safety, D-line, potential linebacker, safety, linebacker, kind of the same thing at this point. And running back. I mean, there's not that many groups that you can say, hey, look, this 3 and then this 3, we feel confident. Like Audric is going to be a guy. Now, maybe not this year, but I think he's going to show this year why he's going to be a guy in the future. Same with Rashid, same with Kevin Green. And so it's because of that, there's a solid second core there. That is why the first group is going to do so much damage. And the second group, you have enough depth there to where if you're missing one of those guys, you can plug a Rashid in, you can plug a Keith in, you can plug a Kevin Green in, and I think you'll still not have as much of a fall off.
So I certainly see where you're going there. I love all your points there. I want to get to my second one, and this is really hard because I wanted to take the wide receivers, but I will respect that you took them, and it's tough because the running backs they're on my list. Quarterback deserves a lot of recognition, and anybody who's out there at the mock game tonight saw that Will Rogers is, like we said at the beginning, a lot better than some people are giving him credit for. But I can't have this conversation. We cannot have this conversation without talking about linebacker, where there's so much of this where, we're seeing those guys line up all over the formation, and whether it be the backups, whether it be Brian Parham or Drew Fowler or Khmori House, who this coaching staff is in love with Khmori House. This coaching staff could not be higher on Khmori, and watching him play, watching his speed, watching him shoot gaps as a blitzer or twist or get around the edge or do a whole bunch of different things. You see why, you understand why. And he's really exciting. I think we're going to see him play a decent amount this year. I don't necessarily know how close he'll get to burning his red shirt, anything like that, but we're going to see him, and he's going to flash because that speed is something to watch. Whereas anybody who watches high school tape understands that he's fast, and then watching him, or he's gained a bunch of weight now, he's retained that speed, and his eyes are incredibly disciplined. He's a lot of fun to watch. And the reason I'm spending so much time on Khmori here is because we know what we're getting out of the starters. We know what we're going to see from Alphonzo Tuputala. If Carson Bruener is one of the 3, 4, 5 best linebackers in the Big Ten, nobody should be surprised. I remember having a conversation with somebody the other day where they were saying, if Carson Bruener is the best player on this team, that might be a problem in a lot of cases. I strongly disagree with that sentiment in this case, where I mean, yeah, if a middle linebacker is somebody who's standing out, like, yeah, I understand why people might be concerned about the defense in one way or another, not with Carson. Not in the slightest bit with Carson Bruener, where his speed, his intelligence, everything about him just is all just what you want from a prototypical NFL linebacker. And then on top of that, he's mastered the scheme. He's a great communicator who's going to make sure this defense is lined up, and just everything about what he's going to do in terms of being a leader on the field is so perfect for him. And the Big Ten is a perfect fit for him in terms of how just his play style. And this scheme is going to get the most out of Carson in the way I don't think we've seen a linebacker just used in that same mold in a very, very long time. And I'm really excited about what his ceiling is in this defense. And Lars, that being said, we're going to get out of here for the day. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals, never-ending conference realignment rumors, our guy Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. With that being said, make sure you check out the Locked On Huskies Insider Program. Like I said a little bit earlier, you can check out the link down in the description below for a free 2-week trial. After that, it's $4.99 a month. We're doing exclusive Q&As. We got a Google Drive that'll give you access to all the interviews we're doing over the course of the season, from spring camp, from fall camp, from media day. We're going to put so much other fun stuff on there over the course of the season. We're still planning out just a content schedule for that sort of thing as well. And if you're interested, again, the link is down in the description below. You also get a chance to text with us one-on-one, ask us any questions you might have with the roster, recruiting, anything like that. We're always happy to help answer whatever questions you might have. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and please remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel for new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. And if you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it really does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.